She walked into his bookstore without a word, saw straight through the walls he'd built around his broken heart, and in that single moment of being truly seen, his carefully hidden life began to unravel, and finally, to heal. Avid had been running the same small bookstore for almost 3 years now. Every single morning started the same way. He would wake up at 7:30, make himself a cup of black coffee, and walk the 6 blocks to his shop. The key would turn in the lock at exactly 9 o'clock. The lights would flicker on. The old wooden floor would creak under his feet as he made his way to the counter. It wasn't a bad life. Not really. The bookstore sat on a quiet street corner in a neighborhood where nothing much happened. Old brick buildings, a coffee shop across the road, a small park 2 blocks down where people walked their dogs, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, but nobody asked too many questions. David liked it that way. He had chosen this life very carefully. After his marriage fell apart 2 years ago, he needed somewhere to hide. Not from anyone in particular, just from everything, from expectations, from disappointments, from the feeling that he had somehow failed at the one thing he thought he had figured out. His ex-wife had wanted more excitement, more ambition, more of everything he couldn't give her. She had left on a Tuesday afternoon in March, taking half their furniture and most of his confidence with her. The divorce papers came 3 months later. He signed them without arguing. What was the point? So he bought this bookstore from an elderly man who wanted to retire. It seemed like the perfect escape. Books didn't demand anything from you. They just sat there, waiting patiently on their shelves. They didn't leave. They didn't complain. They didn't look at you with disappointed eyes and say they expected more. His days followed a pattern so rigid you could set your watch by it. Morning coffee at 9:15, right after opening. Dusting the shelves at 10. Checking inventory at 11. Lunch at 1, usually a sandwich from the deli next door. Afternoons were quiet. A few customers would drift in. Students looking for textbooks. Elderly people browsing the mystery section. Occasionally someone would buy something. He had his regulars. Old Mrs. Patterson, who came in every Thursday for romance novels. She always wore the same purple coat and talked about her cats. There was the college kid who spent hours in the philosophy section but rarely bought anything. The businessman who picked up bestsellers for his weekend train rides. David was polite to all of them. Friendly enough. But he kept his distance. The truth was, he had become a ghost in his own life. He moved through his days like he was watching himself from somewhere far away. Wake up, open shop, go through the motions. Close shop, go home, repeat. Nothing hurt anymore, but nothing felt good either. He existed in a gray space between okay and not okay, and he had convinced himself this was enough. His friends from before had stopped calling. At first they had tried. Invitations to dinners. Requests to meet for drinks. Concerned messages asking if he was all right. But David had turned them all down with polite excuses until they finally got the message. He wasn't interested in rejoining the world. The bookstore was his world now, and it was small enough to manage. Sometimes late at night, lying in bed in his studio apartment, he would wonder if this was really what he wanted. To be 34 years old and already finished with living. But then morning would come and the routine would start again, and wondering didn't seem important anymore. On this particular evening in late October, David was staying late. He had been reorganizing the poetry section all day, a task he had been putting off for months. Books were scattered across the floor. Empty boxes were piled by the door. His back ached from bending and lifting. But there was something calming about the work. Something that required just enough attention to keep his mind from wandering to uncomfortable places. The light outside had faded to that deep blue color that comes just after sunset. Street lamps were flickering on. Through the store window he could see people hurrying home from work, their breath visible in the cold autumn air. He should probably close up soon. It was already past 7. He was shelving the last few books when he heard it. The soft chime of the door opening. David felt a spike of irritation. He had forgotten to lock the door. The close sign was clearly visible in the window. Why couldn't people read? He turned around, ready to politely but firmly tell whoever it was that they would have to come back tomorrow. The words were right there on his tongue, but they never made it out. A woman stood in the doorway. The street lamp behind her created a halo effect, making it hard to see her face clearly at first. But that wasn't what stopped him. It was the way she was looking at him, not the casual glance of someone checking if a store was open, not the apologetic look of someone who knew they were interrupting. She was looking at him like she could see something, like she was reading a page in a book only she could access. Her eyes held his with an intensity that made his heart beat faster for the first time in months. She didn't smile, didn't apologize for the late hour, didn't say a single word. She just stood there looking at him, and something inside David's carefully constructed walls cracked. Just a little, just enough to let in a feeling he thought he had forgotten how to feel, a kind of electricity, a sense that something was about to change. The moment stretched out. 5 seconds, 10. Neither of them moved. The heating system hummed. A car passed outside. The world continued around them, but inside the bookstore time seemed to hold its breath. David opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. What was he supposed to say? His mind had gone completely blank. All he could do was stand there, surrounded by boxes and scattered books, staring at this stranger who had somehow managed to see through 3 years of carefully maintained numbness, with nothing but a look. She took one step inside, then another. The door swung closed behind her with a soft click, and David knew, even though he couldn't explain how he knew, that his quiet, predictable, safe little life was about to become something else entirely. He just didn't know yet whether that terrified him or thrilled him, maybe both. Her name was Claire. David learned that 3 days later when she came back to the bookstore. That first night, after she had stood in the doorway looking at him with those searching eyes, she had simply walked to the poetry section. She spent 20 minutes running her fingers along the spines of books, occasionally pulling one out and flipping through pages. She never asked for help, never made small talk. When she finally chose a slim volume of poems by someone David had never heard of, she paid in cash, nodded once, and left. No smile. No thank you. Just that same intense look that made David feel like she could see all the broken pieces he had been trying so hard to hide. He thought about her for the next 2 days. Which was strange because David had trained himself not to think about anything too much. Thinking led to feeling, and feeling led to pain, but something about this woman had slipped past his defenses before he even knew they were down. When she came back on Wednesday afternoon, David was sorting through a box of used books someone had dropped off. He looked up and there she was, standing inside the door like she had materialized out of thin air. She wore a long, dark coat and carried a camera bag over her shoulder. Her hair was pulled back in a simple way that somehow made her look both serious and young at the same time. This time she spoke. Her voice was quieter than he expected. "You have good light in here," she said, looking up at the windows. Especially in the afternoon. David glanced around his own store like he was seeing it for the first time. Light streamed through the tall windows, creating patterns on the wooden floor. Dust particles floated in the golden beams. He had never really noticed before. It was just his store, just the place where he spent his days waiting for them to end. "I guess so," he said. "Never really thought about it." She walked slowly through the aisles and David found himself watching her. The way she moved was deliberate, careful, like she was paying attention to things other people missed. She would stop sometimes and tilt her head, looking at a shelf or a corner or the way books were stacked on a table. Once he caught her taking a photo with her camera, though he wasn't sure what she was photographing. This became her pattern. She would come in 3 or 4 times a week, always quiet, always observing. Sometimes she bought books. Sometimes she just wandered and looked and eventually left. David started to expect her. Started to notice when the afternoon stretched on and she hadn't appeared. Started to feel something that might have been disappointment on the days she didn't come. He learned small things about her in fragments. She was a photographer. She had just moved back to the city after living somewhere else for several years. She liked poetry but also books about architecture and design. She drank her coffee black. She never talked on her phone in the store, but mostly what David learned was that she saw things. Really saw them. One day she mentioned how the books on his shelf were organized by color rather than author in one section, and he realized he had done that without thinking during one of his many reorganizing sessions. Another time she commented on a water stain on the ceiling that looked like a bird in flight. He had stared at that stain for 3 years and never seen anything but a stain. The breakthrough came on a gray afternoon in early November. David was behind the counter, mindlessly scrolling through supply orders on his computer. The bell chimed and Claire walked in, But instead of disappearing into the aisles like usual, she approached the counter. She set something down in front of him. A photograph. Black and white. 8 by 10, it was his bookstore, but not the way he saw it. The photo was taken from across the street at dusk. Warm light poured from the windows into the darkness outside. Through the glass, you could see the shelves of books, the worn armchair in the corner, the lamp casting its gentle glow. It looked like a sanctuary, a small pool of warmth and safety in a cold world. It looked beautiful, and David realized with a strange ache in his chest that he had never thought of his store as beautiful. He had thought of it as a hiding place, a cave, a place to wait out the rest of his life without being bothered. But Claire had seen something else. "I thought you might want it," she said. "For the store," David looked up at her. "You took this?" She nodded. "I've been working on a project. Places around the city. I'm trying to capture spaces that feel like, I don't know, like they're waiting for something. Or hiding something. Or both. And you think my bookstore is like that?" She held his gaze. "I think you are like that." The words hung in the air between them. David felt exposed, seen. It should have made him angry or defensive, but instead he felt something crack open inside him. Something he had kept locked away for so long he had almost forgotten it was there. "I don't know what you mean," he said, but they both knew it was a lie. Claire pulled up a stool on the other side of the counter. "I spent 3 years in another city after my brother passed away. I thought if I went somewhere new, somewhere he had never been, it wouldn't hurt as much. I took thousands of photos, documented everything, but I was really just hiding behind my camera, watching life instead of living it." David felt his throat tighten. "Why did you come back?" "Because I realized you can't run from grief. You can only move through it. And I couldn't do that alone in a strange place. I needed to come home." She paused. "Even though home is the place where all the memories live." They talked for over an hour that day, the longest conversation David had had with anyone in months, maybe years. Claire told him about her brother, about how he died suddenly in a car accident, about how she kept thinking she saw him in crowds, about how she used photography to make sense of a world that no longer made sense. David found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone. About the divorce. About how he felt like he had failed at the one thing that was supposed to last forever. About how he came to this bookstore to stop feeling things and how it had worked maybe too well. About how he sometimes woke up in the middle of the night, wondering if this half-life was really what he wanted, or just what he had settled for because he was afraid. When Claire finally left that evening, she turned back at the door. "I'm having a small exhibition next month. Just some of my new work at a gallery downtown. You should come. If you want." She handed him a simple card with the gallery's address and walked out into the November darkness. David stood behind his counter holding the invitation and the photograph of his bookstore that looked like a home. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt something that might have been hope, small and fragile and terrifying. But there. David kept the invitation card on his bedside table for 2 weeks. Every morning he would see it when he woke up. Every night it was the last thing he looked at before turning off the light. The gallery opening was on a Friday evening. He told himself he probably wouldn't go. He had a dozen good reasons not to. He would be tired after work. He didn't know anything about art. He would feel out of place. Claire probably just invited him to be polite anyway. But Friday afternoon came and David found himself closing the bookstore early. He went home and changed his shirt 3 times before settling on the first one he had picked. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror and barely recognized the nervous person staring back at him. When had he last felt nervous about anything? The gallery was in a renovated warehouse downtown. Large windows, white walls, track lighting that made everything look important and intentional. David walked in feeling like an imposter. There were maybe 40 people scattered around the space, holding wine glasses and speaking in those hushed gallery voices that always made him uncomfortable. Then he saw the photographs. They covered 3 walls of the main space, large prints, all black and white, and each one felt like a punch to the chest, not because they were dramatic or shocking, but because they were so deeply, quietly true. There was an old woman sitting alone in a diner at dawn, her face lit by the neon sign outside. A teenage boy on a subway platform, headphones on, eyes closed, lost in whatever music was playing. A businessman sitting on a park bench feeding pigeons, his expensive suit rumpled, his tie loose, his face carrying the weight of something heavy and private. Every photograph captured a moment of raw, unguarded humanity, people caught in their real emotions when they thought no one was watching. Loneliness, joy, grief, hope. All of it right there on the surface if you knew how to look. David walked slowly from image to image, feeling something shift inside him with each one. Claire had this gift for seeing people as they really were, not as they pretended to be, not as they wanted others to see them, but as they actually existed in their most honest moments. Then he turned a corner and stopped breathing. It was him. The photograph showed David in his bookstore, taken through the front window. He was sitting in the armchair in the corner, a book in his lap, but he wasn't reading. He was staring at nothing, his face carrying an expression of such profound loneliness that David felt ashamed seeing it. This was what he looked like when he thought no one was watching. This was the truth he had been hiding from himself. The title card next to the photo read, "Waiting Room." David stood there for a long time, unable to look away from his own sadness reflected back at him. People moved around him, commenting on other photos, sipping their wine, but he barely noticed. All he could see was himself. Really see himself. For the first time in years, "I'm sorry," he turned. Claire stood beside him, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. She wasn't wearing her usual practical clothes. Tonight she had on a simple black dress and her hair was down. She looked worried. "I should have asked permission," she said. "I took that photo months ago before we ever really talked. I almost didn't include it in the show, but my curator said it was one of the strongest pieces. If you want me to take it down, I will. Right now. I'll tell everyone there was a mistake." David looked back at the photograph, at his own lonely face. "Is that really what I look like?" Claire was quiet for a moment. "That's what you looked like before." "Before what?" "Before you started coming back." The words settled over him like snow. Soft and cold and somehow cleansing. He realized she was right. He had been coming back, slowly, carefully, without even realizing it was happening. The conversations with Claire, the way he had started noticing light and details again, the fact that he was standing here in a gallery on a Friday night instead of sitting alone in his apartment eating takeout and watching nothing on television. "I don't want you to take it down," David said finally. "I think I needed to see it." Relief washed over Claire's face. "Would you let me show you the rest? I want to explain something." She led him to another wall where a series of smaller photographs hung in a grid. These were different from the others. Still black and white, but the subjects were looking directly at the camera, making eye contact, and their faces held something the other photos didn't, a kind of defiant aliveness. "These are people I met over the past 6 months," Claire explained. "People who all had one thing in common. They had all lost something big. A person they loved. A career they built. A version of themselves they thought they would be forever. And they were all stuck, just existing, going through the motions. Like me," David said quietly. "Like both of us," Claire corrected. "I was stuck too. That's why I could recognize it in other people. It's like we all became experts at spotting our own disease in others." She pointed to a photo of a woman probably in her 50s, with gray hair and fierce eyes. She lost her husband to cancer. Spent 2 years barely leaving her house. Then one day she adopted a rescue dog and started volunteering at the shelter. She told me the dog didn't save her life. She saved her own life. The dog just reminded her she still could. Another photo showed a young man with tattoos covering his arms. He was in prison for 4 years. Made mistakes when he was younger that he couldn't take back. Got out and everyone expected him to fail again. But he didn't, started working construction. Got his own apartment. He said the hardest part wasn't building a new life. It was believing he deserved one. Claire turned to face David fully. "I called this exhibition The Weight of Living. Because that's what it is, isn't it? Living takes weight. It takes effort. It's so much easier to just stop, to go numb, to hide. But these people, they chose the harder thing. They chose to feel again, to try again, to show up for their own lives even when it hurt." David felt his eyes burning. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I saw you in that bookstore looking exactly like I felt. And I thought maybe if I could show you what I was seeing, you might recognize yourself. Might realize you're not the only one who feels this way, and might decide to do something about it." "And have you?" David asked. "Done something about it?" Claire smiled, but it was sad around the edges. I'm trying. Coming back here was the first step. Putting my brother's memory into my work instead of running from it was the second, but I'm still scared most days. Still not sure I'm doing it right. They stood together in the gallery, surrounded by images of broken people choosing to mend. Around them, conversations continued. Wine flowed. People admired art without understanding they were looking at mirrors. David thought about his bookstore, about the 3 years he had spent hiding behind the counter, rearranging the same books, living the same empty day over and over. He thought about Claire's question from their conversation in the shop, about what he would do if he wasn't afraid. Can I buy you coffee? He heard himself say. After this is over. There's a place that's open late a few blocks from here. Claire's smile changed, became real. I would really like that. And standing there in a gallery full of photographs about people choosing to live again, David made a choice too. A small one. Just coffee with someone who saw him. But it was a start. And sometimes that's all change ever is. A series of small starts that add up to something bigger when you're not looking. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks through the city on weekends. Walks turned into phone calls that lasted until midnight. And slowly, without David quite realizing when it happened, Claire became part of his life in a way he hadn't let anyone be in years. It started small. One Saturday morning, Claire showed up at the bookstore with paint samples. She held them up against the walls, squinting at them in the light, while David watched from behind the counter with a mix of amusement and confusion. What are you doing? He asked. Your walls are depressing, she said matter-of-factly. This gray color makes the whole place feel like a waiting room. Which I guess was the point before, but maybe not anymore. She was right. The walls were a dull gray that he had never really looked at. Just accepted, like he had accepted so many things about his life without questioning whether they actually made him happy. They painted the bookstore the following weekend. A warm cream color that made the space feel bigger and brighter. David's regular customers noticed immediately. Mrs. Patterson said it felt like the store had woken up from a long sleep. The college kid actually smiled at him for the first time ever, but the changes went deeper than paint. David started hosting poetry readings on Thursday evenings. Just small gatherings where local writers could share their work. Claire helped him set up chairs and make coffee. The first night, only 6 people showed up. By the third week, they had 20. People started staying after to talk and browse. The bookstore stopped feeling like a place people passed through and started feeling like a place they wanted to be. He created a corner for local artists to display their work. Claire was the first, of course. Her photographs lined one wall, changing every month. But then a painter asked if he could show some pieces. Then a sculptor. The bookstore was becoming something more than just books. It was becoming a community. David felt himself changing too. He laughed more. Talked to customers instead of just processing their purchases. He started writing again, something he hadn't done since college. Just small things. Observations, thoughts, lines of poetry that came to him while shelving books or watching the light change through the windows. Claire photographed him during these moments. Not secretly this time, but openly. She said she was documenting his transformation, creating a series about what it looks like when someone chooses to rejoin the world. David let her because he trusted her to see him honestly. They grew closer in ways that felt both natural and terrifying. Claire would rest her head on his shoulder while they sat in the bookstore after closing. David would reach for her hand without thinking while they walked. They hadn't talked about what they were to each other, hadn't labeled it, but it was there between them, growing like something planted in good soil. Then on a Tuesday afternoon in February, David's ex-wife walked into the bookstore. He was helping a customer when he looked up and saw her standing by the door. Rebecca. She looked different. Her hair was shorter. She seemed tired in a way he didn't remember. For 3 years he had imagined what he would feel if he saw her again. Anger maybe, hurt, bitterness. But standing there looking at her, all he felt was a kind of distant sadness. Like looking at a photograph of someone you used to know. "Hi, David," she said when the customer left. Her voice was small, uncertain. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" She walked closer, looking around the store. "I heard you fixed the place up. It looks really good. Different." "Yeah. I made some changes." An awkward silence stretched between them. All the history they shared and couldn't share anymore sitting heavy in the air. I made a mistake, she finally said. Leaving. I thought I wanted something different, something more exciting. But I was wrong. I was stupid. And I'm sorry. David felt his chest tighten. This was what he had wanted to hear 2 years ago. 3 years ago, he had imagined her coming back, apologizing, wanting to try again. In those fantasies, he always took her back. Always got his old life returned to him like a misplaced package finally delivered. But now, standing here, those fantasies felt like they belonged to a different person. Someone he used to be but wasn't anymore. I appreciate you saying that, David said carefully. I really do. But I don't think... I'm not asking you to decide right now, Rebecca interrupted. I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve another chance. But maybe we could just talk? Have dinner? See if there's anything left worth saving.
David thought about Claire.
About the way she saw him. About how he had spent months learning to be honest with himself and with her. About how they had built something fragile and real from their shared brokenness. There's someone else, he said. The words came out before he had fully decided to say them. But once they were out, he knew they were true. Not just because of Claire, but because of himself. I'm different now. I'm not the person you left anymore. And I think that person needed to leave for me to become who I am now. Rebecca's face fell. She nodded slowly, her eyes getting shiny with tears she was trying not to let fall. Is it serious? With this someone else? David thought about it. I don't know yet, maybe, but that's not really the point. The point is I can't go backward. I spent too long trying to move forward. After she left, David sat alone in the bookstore for a long time. He felt strange. Not happy exactly, but not sad either. More like he had closed a door that had been left open for years, and now the draft had finally stopped. When Claire came by that evening, he told her everything. About Rebecca showing up, about what she had asked, about what he had said. He watched Claire's face carefully, trying to read her reaction. Are you okay? She asked. I think so. Is that weird? That I'm okay? Claire took his hand. No, it means you've healed. That's what healing looks like. When the things that used to break you apart just make you feel quiet and a little sad. But then something shifted in her expression, a kind of pulling back. A door closing that David hadn't known was open. What's wrong? He asked. Nothing. I'm happy for you, I am. It's just... She trailed off, looking away. Just what? I'm scared, she admitted. This thing between us, it's been so good, easy. But easy things always seem to end, don't they? And I'm afraid that I'm just another step in your healing process. Another person helping you become who you need to be before you move on to what you actually want. David felt his heart crack. You think I'm using you? No, not on purpose. But people do that sometimes without meaning to. They find someone who helps them through the hard part. And then once they're better, they realize that person was just a bridge, not a destination. You're not a bridge, Claire. How do you know? How do either of us know? They sat in silence, both suddenly aware of how fragile what they had built really was, how easy it would be to break, how terrifying it was to need someone again after spending so long learning not to need anyone. I don't have all the answers, David said finally. I don't know what this is or where it's going, but I know that when I said no to Rebecca today, I wasn't thinking about not losing you. I was thinking about not losing myself. The version of me that I've worked so hard to become. And you're part of that version. You're woven into who I am now. Claire looked at him with those eyes that always saw too much. I need some time, she said quietly, to figure out what I'm feeling. To make sure I'm not just scared because things are good and I'm waiting for them to go bad. How much time? I don't know. Is that okay? David wanted to say no, wanted to hold on tight and not let her pull away, but he understood. Fear wasn't something you could logic away. It was something you had to sit with until it got quieter. Yeah, he said. It's okay. Claire squeezed his hand once and then left. And David sat in his bookstore that was no longer just a hiding place, surrounded by all the changes he had made, wondering if becoming a better version of yourself meant losing the person who helped you get there. Claire didn't come to the bookstore for 3 weeks. David told himself he was fine with it. She needed space. He understood. He kept himself busy with the store. With the Thursday poetry readings that had become so popular, he had to start turning people away. He organized a book club. He started carrying locally roasted coffee. He even adopted a cat that had been hanging around the back door, a scraggly orange thing that the customers loved. But every time the door chimed, his heart jumped. Every time it wasn't her, something inside him sank a little lower. He didn't call her, didn't text. She had asked for time and he was giving it to her, even though waiting felt like holding his breath underwater. He wrote instead. Pages and pages of thoughts he would never send. Poetry about loss and hope and the terrible courage it took to let someone see you completely. Mrs. Patterson noticed he seemed distracted. "You've got that look," she said one Thursday, picking up her usual romance novel. "What look?" "The look of a man who let something good walk away and is trying to convince himself it was the right thing to do." David managed a weak smile. "Is it that obvious?" "Honey, I've been reading love stories for 40 years. I know the difference between giving someone space and giving up." "Which one are you doing?" He didn't have an answer. On a cold morning in early March, David opened the bookstore to find an envelope slipped under the door. His name was written on it in Claire's handwriting. His hand shook as he opened it. Inside was a single photograph and a note. The photograph showed David behind the counter of his bookstore, but everything about it was different from that first picture she had taken. In this one, he was laughing at something someone off camera had said. His eyes were bright. His whole face was alive. The bookstore around him was full of people and light and motion. It looked like a place where things happened, where life was being lived. The note was short. "I took this last week during the poetry reading. I came but stayed in the back where you wouldn't see me. I needed to know something. Whether the change in you was real or just temporary, whether you were becoming someone or just trying to impress me. This photo is my answer. You don't need me to be this person. You already are this person, and that terrifies me more than anything, because it means if I let myself love you, it won't be because you need me to complete you. It will be because I want you. And wanting someone feels so much more dangerous than being needed by them. I'm still scared, but I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. Come find me if you want. I'll be at the place where we had coffee that first night. Today at 7. I'll wait for 1 hour. After that, I'll understand if you don't show. Love, Claire." David read the note 3 times. He looked at his watch. It was 9 in the morning, 10 hours until 7. The longest 10 hours of his life stretched out in front of him. He tried to work, tried to focus on inventory and customer orders, but his mind kept wandering to what he would say, what she might say, what it meant that she had written love at the end of the note. Not sincerely or yours truly, but love. The day crawled by. Every minute felt like an hour. At 6:30, he closed the store early for the second time in his life. The first had been the night of Claire's exhibition. He was starting to notice that all his most important moments seemed to involve closing the store early. Maybe that meant something. He walked the 12 blocks to the coffee shop instead of taking his car. He needed the time to think, to breathe, to prepare himself for whatever was about to happen. She was already there when he arrived, sitting at a small table by the window. 2 cups of coffee sat in front of her, one on each side of the table. Steam rose from both. She had been waiting, watching the door. When she saw him, her face broke into a smile that made his chest ache. He sat down across from her and wrapped his hands around the warm cup. "You came," she said. "Of course I came. Did you think I wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything anymore." They sat in silence for a moment, both holding their coffee cups like anchors. "I'm sorry I disappeared," Claire said finally. "It wasn't fair to you, but I needed to figure out what I was afraid of. Whether I was afraid of losing you or afraid of having you. And what did you figure out? That I was afraid of both. But more than that, I was afraid of being happy. Because every time I've been happy in my life, something has come along and taken it away. My brother. My sense of safety in the world. Even my relationship with my parents changed after he died. Happy became something dangerous. Something that meant I was about to lose everything." David reached across the table and took her hand. "I understand that. I think I've been afraid of the same thing. That's why I hid for so long. If you don't have anything, you can't lose anything." "But that's not living," Claire said. "That's just existing. And I'm so tired of just existing." "Me too." She squeezed his hand. "I went back to the cemetery where my brother is buried. I hadn't been there since the funeral. 3 years avoiding the one place where I knew I would have to face the truth. That he's really gone. That he's never coming back. That I have to find a way to live in a world where he doesn't exist anymore." "How did it feel?" "Terrible. I cried for 2 hours. Just sat there on the ground next to his headstone and let myself fall apart. But you know what? When I was done crying, I felt lighter, like I had been carrying this enormous weight and finally put it down. Not forever. I'll pick it up again. Grief isn't something you get over. But for that moment, I was free of it. She looked at David with those eyes that always saw everything, and I realized something sitting there. My brother would be so angry at me for stopping my life because he lost his. He always said I played it too safe. Never took risks. Never put myself out there. And here I was doing exactly that with you. Playing it safe. Protecting myself, when really the most dangerous thing I could do was let another year go by without trying. Trying what? David asked, even though he thought he knew. Trying to love someone. Trying to let someone love me back. Trying to build something real instead of just documenting everyone else's real moments from behind a camera. David felt his throat tighten. I want to try too. I want to try with you. Even though I'm messy and scared and probably going to panic again at some point. Even though all of that. Because I'm messy and scared too. And I think maybe that's okay. Maybe perfect people don't exist. Maybe all we can do is be honestly broken together and see what we can build from the pieces. Claire laughed, and it sounded like relief. That might be the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. They sat in that coffee shop until it closed, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and breaking them and making new ones. They talked about her next photography project, about his idea to expand the bookstore's poetry section, about taking a trip somewhere neither of them had been before. When they finally left, walking out into the cold March night, Claire stopped on the sidewalk and turned to face him. I need you to know something. You changed my life, but not because you fixed me or saved me or any of that. You changed my life because you showed up as yourself, broken and hiding and slowly coming back to life, and that gave me permission to do the same thing. David pulled her close, feeling her warmth against him. That's what you did for me too. You saw me when I had forgotten how to see myself. They walked back to the bookstore together, their breath visible in the cold air, their hands clasped tight. The bookstore lights were off, but David could see it through the window. His sanctuary that had started as a hiding place and become a home. Will you come in? He asked. I want to show you something. Inside, he led her to a wall where he had been working on something in secret. His own photographs covered the space. Not professional like hers, just pictures taken on his phone. Images of the bookstore during poetry readings. Customers browsing shelves. The orange cat sleeping in the window. Mrs. Patterson laughing at something. The Thursday night regulars debating over coffee. I've been documenting too, David said. Everything that's changed. Everyone who's become part of this place. I realized you taught me to see. Not just to look, but to really see what's in front of me. Claire studied the wall, her eyes moving from image to image. It's beautiful. It's like a love letter to your own life. That's exactly what it is. She turned to him, and in her eyes he saw everything they had been through, all the fear and healing and tentative steps toward each other. All the ways they had both been broken and were slowly becoming whole. I love you, she said simply. I don't know if that's too soon to say or if I'm supposed to wait longer, but I'm tired of waiting. I love you. I love you too, David said, and meant it more than he had ever meant anything. They stood there in the dark bookstore, two people who had learned to live again, choosing each other not because they needed to, but because they wanted to. And that made all the difference.